How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spear Talk. You might not know this, but before I record an episode, I like to break a sweat. And I do that using the Chop Fit. Over the course of the past year, the Chop Fit has allowed me to lose weight, tone up my body, and feel even more amazing about myself. A feeling that you should all feel about yourselves as well. If you use this code, SpearChop10, you get $10 off your order. Once again, use code SpearChop10 and $10 off your Chop Fit order. It'll change your life. Thank you. How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spear Talk, and today we're welcoming two incredible guests. The first guest, Josh, who I was fortunate enough to train with and serve with the United States Secret Service. We spent a lot of years at the White House, and one of the things we always talked about on some of those long nights was all things Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, anything you could imagine that would storm the White House. The other guest today is the incredible Ken Gerhard. Ken is a cryptozoologist, field investigator, a fellow of the Pangea Institute, incredible author of some incredible books right here. The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, The Essential Guide to the Loch Ness Monster, and the Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts. You've also seen Ken on Monster Quest, Ancient Aliens, Missing in Alaska, and some other incredible shows. Guys, it's great to have you on here.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. It's definitely an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. So I'm looking forward to talking about cryptids, cryptozoology.
Yeah. Same here.
Love
Thanks
it.
for having me on, John.
So Ken, to kind of get this started, obviously Josh and I love all things Bigfoot and the unknown and the fascination with it all. For the listeners out there that aren't aware, that know of Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster, but they're kind of grouped under this idea of cryptozoology. Now, if you could kind of explain to us what that is and then how the heck you got into this line of work.
Yeah, well, the word cryptozoology is derived from the Latin words cryptos, meaning hidden, and ology is, of course, the study of. So it's a study of hidden animals, cryptozoology. Zoo is the animal part, of course. By hidden animals, we basically mean species that have not yet been recognized officially by science. And many of those tend to be very highly romantic and sort of legendary creatures like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, Mothman, and the list goes on and on. Most scientists, of course, are reticent to get involved in that kind of research because these things seem so improbable that they don't want to put their reputations on the line. So it falls to laymen like myself, but we still follow a scientific methodology. So we're still trying to stay within the confines of zoology and scientific research. As far as how I got into it, it's just been a lifelong passion of mine. What I always tell people is when I was a kid growing up, I loved animals. I had lots of weird pets like little alligator caiman things and snakes. And then I was really into monster movies. So I grew up on Godzilla movies and Planet of the Apes. So when I first found out about Bigfoot, when I was about 8 or 9 years old in the 70s, it was just like something clicked in my head, because here you had, it was a monster and it was also kind of an animal or a creature possibly. So it was kind of like, it was a perfect synthesis of those ideas. And I never planned on making it a career, but it's just something I've researched my whole life. And then, years ago, I got very lucky. I started working with other Bigfoot researchers and cryptid investigators and doing field work, and wrote some books and was on some TV shows. But I think the really influential part that I always like to highlight is that my mother was very adventurous and loved to travel. And she used to tell me stories about the Yeti and the Mothman growing up. She really stoked my interest. And she arranged for me to travel with her all over the world. I mean, when I was at a young age, I was camping along the Amazon River. I was hiking through the Australian desert and Africa and all these Asia, everywhere. And at age 15, I was at Loch Ness in Scotland at 15 years old with a movie camera and taking notes and trying to investigate the Loch Ness Monster. So it's something I've done my whole life just as a passion. Never really planned to make a career out of it. I've just been very blessed.
How it must be, for me, it's fascinating because you're an expert and you spent your whole life and career studying whether it's Bigfoot or Loch Ness and these other entities. But the fact that there's nothing been definitively proven one way or the other, does it kind of dishearten you in the sense of that maybe you're searching for something that doesn't exist. Like, how do you kind of, when news bits comes out of people with found footage, or oh, my uncle saw something in the cabin or whatever, but nothing comes to it, does it kind of dishearten you and kind of bother you that maybe you're chasing the holy grail that doesn't exist?
Well, admittedly, I've become a little bit more skeptical through the years as I've stayed in this field. I think I'm more skeptical now. When I was younger, maybe I was a little more optimistic about some of these. So there are a lot of cryptids that I view with kind of a skeptical eye now. A lot of evidence that I, immediately try to debunk and explain, because that should be the first step in the process, anyways. But to me, it always comes back to certain things, which are, first of all, the world is a lot bigger than we realize.
Right.
Even in this modern day and age of super fast tech and social media, I mean, I've been around the world. I've seen how much wilderness area there is that's unexplored, that's uninhabited. About half of the Earth's land surface is still uninhabited by man, largely. You've got all the deep oceans and waterways. And also new species are being discovered. Most of them are small, but I mean, technically, there are about 5,000 new species that are described each year. Most of those are going to be things that are like insects, millipedes, right, mollusks, things like that aren't that significant. But every few years, scientists recognize some large animal that's, unexpected. 2013, a new species of tapir was described in South America. We were talking about a 250-pound animal. So it's kind of those two dynamics that keep me encouraged. And also, one thing that keeps me grounded is a lot of my heroes, the pioneers in the field of cryptozoology, men who went before me. I mean, it goes back to the 1950s, guys. That's when it kind of, this whole pursuit started. A lot of those pioneers and the generations that came before me recognized that they would not solve those mysteries in their lifetime, and that they would have to pass the mantle on to the next generations. And I guess I accept that now too.
I love that.
It may not be in my lifetime that we find definitive evidence of a Bigfoot or a Loch Ness Monster, but I see a younger generation of researchers coming up that are ready to go with it. So, I'm hopeful in that respect.
To pivot off John's kind of question there, and you're preaching to the choir on some of the cryptids. I mean, I've had some strange experiences myself, and I'm open-minded. So the concept that there could be some things out there that haven't been discovered isn't foreign to me. Where do you kind of draw the line between the skeptics or the mainstream science that writes a lot of it off, and then kind of where you're at now with some things you're not seeing evidence to? Do you think maybe some of the things that we haven't found evidence for still existed at one time, and kind of the window of opportunity to discover those things is kind of gone?
Well, that's certainly a reality of the world we live in. I'm very blessed to work with the San Antonio Zoo, and I'm a volunteer there, but they've kind of embraced me and a lot of my cryptozoology interest. And what I've learned, the San Antonio Zoo, we're really engaged, as a lot of zoos are, in active breeding programs for endangered species conservation. And when you realize how many species have gone extinct in our lifetime and how many are rapidly declining, it's not to be on a soapbox here, but it's just a reality that we are basically destroying enough habitats, and climate change, all these things are having an effect. And so, yes, it is a reality that some of these things may actually go extinct before we find them. Maybe they were already vulnerable or endangered at the time that we first began to investigate and explore and look for them. So that is a reality. As far as the scientific, it's all a balancing act, really. But a true skeptic is someone who I think tries to be as objective as possible and not let your hopes and biases and things kind of lead you astray. So I don't know. I think I try not to get discouraged. I try to be optimistic, and but I also try to look at things in the most scientific terms possible. And science oftentimes is about probabilities. So you might have 3 possible explanations for a phenomenon, but you have to look at which explanation, is the hardest to challenge in terms of, what it presents, So,
Do you think?
Well, I hope I answered it.
Yeah, no, I think
Oh,
that definitely answers it, and I like how you ended on probability. Which I'll ask one more question before we get back to John. Do you think with like a lot of the modern technology we're seeing in some of the shows that you've been a part of on TV, the increased use of drone footage, or how everyone has a camera in their pocket now, and that necessarily wasn't the case 50 years ago. Do you think that it's only more of a matter of time before some of this stuff is more documented in a credible way?
Yeah, good question. No doubt. I think technology is our best friend at this point. Example, I just finished writing a book about the Loch Ness Monster. A lot of people aren't aware of the amount of sonar evidence. Thanks, John.
Mm.
A lot of sonar evidence that's been collected. People think about the photographs and the sightings, but dating back to 1954, there have been a number of times when large, very large, like 20 to 30 foot animate objects have been contacted and recorded with different sonar technologies in Loch Ness. And looking at the schematics and the way the sonar technology has improved, I mean, the imaging is it's mind-blowing now with the amount of detail that you can see, whereas in the past it was just a blotch, little thing,
Yeah, yeah.
and a little blotch. Okay, there's something down there. So that's one example. Thermal imaging, of course. Some of the cryptids we look for, like Bigfoot, we assume they must be warm-blooded or endothermic, so they're going to give off a heat signature. So if you're out there in the dark woods at night, suddenly you're not affected by the amount of light available because you're looking for heat, and that's a pretty amazing technology. eDNA is a burgeoning thing in the field, and you can now take a water or soil sample from an environment and then filter out all of the biological material, and geneticists can actually go in there and map or sequence the DNA of every animal that's come in contact with that water,
Wow.
Over a few weeks. That's pretty mind blowing. So
Yeah,
yes,
crazy.
Impressive.
I think the technology is really good, is what's going to push us over the edge, or to the summit, if we are going to prove that any of these things exist. I think that's a key point.
One of the things, obviously, I think you as well, that Patterson footage, the iconic footage of Bigfoot walking past that pile of logs, whatever. When I first saw that, and when I was younger, going to the library, pulling all these Bigfoot books out, and I was always drawn to that. I mean, I really want this thing to exist, and the skeptic part of me is always very. This could have been a guy in a suit, like you have that uncle that always dresses like a wolf man, where it scares us. It's like that could have happened, but it's like. Say it is real, and I want to believe it is. The fact that person caught that image or whatever at that time, it's kind of mind blowing, and it's just for me. I guess the question is, how often do you go back and look at that footage and kind of debate that, or kind of like how do you compare that to what's like you? I see that footage. I haven't seen anything that real. I would say realistic compared to maybe some grainy photos or some weird noise type stuff people record in the woods. Like, how come there's been such a disparity between that footage to what could happen next week?
Yeah, well, a little while ago, I was talking about how I grew up on monster movies in the late
Yes.
60s, early 70s. Well, what I often tell people is the very first time I saw the Patterson Gimlin footage on TV, my immediate thought was, that's not a costume. I'm familiar with monster costumes of all kinds back in the 1970s, and you could actually see this thing looked naturally robust. I mean, the muscles and the fluidity, and it just didn't look like a clunky costume, which is what you would expect in 1967. I've never wavered on that opinion. I'm convinced it's real. It is the best footage by far, which is a skeptic could make into a strong argument against Bigfoot, because it seems like with all the camera technologies we have now, we would have at least matched that by now.
Right.
But what a lot of people don't realize and understand about, and a lot of it was just dumb luck, but what a lot of people don't realize about that day, and the footage was captured in the afternoon of October 20th, 1967. Roger Patterson happened to have a 16 millimeter film camera with him that he had rented because he was filming a documentary about his search for Bigfoot, and he had heard there were some tracks in that area recently.
Right.
He had actually Patterson was a rodeo cowboy and an athletic guy, a small guy. He had actually positioned the camera in his saddlebag on his horse. They were riding on horseback, and was trained and ready to pull that camera out on an instant's notice. So he had already prepared himself for the possibility, as remote as it might be, that they would come across a Bigfoot. A lot of people don't know that. So unlike people, those of us that might fumble with our
Right.
Bigfoot, I mean, he was like, that was it. That was his mission. And he was a pretty passionate guy. When he and Bob Gimlin, and by the way, I've known Bob Gimlin since 2005, and he's pretty darn credible. He and Gimlin rode up on horseback, which is another factor. They maybe the Bigfoot couldn't smell them because their scent was being masked by the horses they were on.
It's a good point. Yeah, I never thought about that.
The Bigfoot was apparently crouched down by a water source at Bluff Creek, obscured by some fallen tree root system. Maybe smelled the horses or heard the horses, but Bigfoot's not going to be freaked out by animals like that. So when they rode around this tree, there it was, and it stood up, and their horses apparently did react and got real, especially Patterson's horse wasn't real well trained, and it started acting up. But as he was falling off of his horse, Patterson had the wherewithal to grab the camera out of his saddlebag where he knew it was, fall off the horse. And he was so gung-ho about Bigfoot that, unlike a lot of people that would have probably freaked out or frozen, he started running towards it and filming.
Oh, wow.
Fearlessly. And he stumbles a few times, and you can see that in the film. And he finally positions himself on his knee, and he's able to get the classic shot that we get of Patty walking off.
Right.
So anyways, there's a lot of factors there that people don't realize. Why is that footage? How was he able to get that footage? Well, it was preparedness. It was dumb luck. It was the fact they were on horseback, maybe, and also the fearless nature of Patterson and his willingness to kind of really chase after this thing and get this footage. At least that's what I think.
Now, I think I would be scared out of my mind because you're not expecting it. But for you guys, I guess starting with you, Josh, you come across Bigfoot in the wild. What is your reaction? Are you taking a picture for the world to see, or do you just kind of? I always envision myself if I saw like a unicorn or a werewolf or something crazy. I'm like, part of me wants to be so selfish and just witness this with my own two eyes and say, B. But then part of me is like, man, do you realize what I could sell this picture for? And have centuries of people debating whether I faked this thing or whatever. So what would you do if you saw a Bigfoot?
I was going to mention, like me and some of my friends, we do go camping. We do our little expeditions here and there up in Mitchell State Forest in Pennsylvania, where there have been some sightings up there. And, we go up there for the fun of it. And, if we do see something, to document it. But, since we both have a law enforcement background, there's like what you're intending to do, and then there's the moment it happens. And I think it would depend on like that time and distance, that safety buffer. If I see something that large that has had just as many stories of, seeing you and running away as there have been horrifying stories of very bad encounters out there, like the legends of, some people not disappearing in the woods or not coming back. I think it would be, if it's far away, probably try to scramble for that camera, that phone. But if it's closer, I think you're having that pucker factor kick in where you're like, I gotta go, man, like, and hope you can outrun something that's that much taller. And I'm not a big guy, so I don't think I would fare well in a fist fight with Bigfoot. So yeah, I think it's for sure. And it's a good point. And Ken, maybe you can allude to some of this. I had a question of, like, when you're out in the field researching, whether it be Bigfoot or, anything else, do you put any kind of thought into your own security of what you would do if you do encounter something? And to pivot off that, what has been your scariest moment you've had in the field?
Wow.
Right, because you can still see a bear. Like that animal can, at least that bear could really kill you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a fair question. Okay, so not to come off as too cocky, but I consider myself pretty fearless when it comes to chasing these things, which I think is, maybe it's crazy, but that's one of the things it takes. But when I was a kid, I grew up in Southeast Texas in kind of a swamp when I was a teenager, and we lived out in the remote area. There were a lot of venomous snakes and creepy crawlies and alligators, and I used to sneak out of my window at night and run around in the woods, as a kid. So I wasn't scared of anything out there. And that, I think, it's kind of a state of mind. But what is the most dangerous animal on the planet?
human.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right.
We're the biggest, baddest thing out there. That's kind of always the way I've looked at it. And in fact, in my Bigfoot book, I talk about how I think Bigfoot recognizes that we're its biggest threat. It's intelligent enough to recognize that, then it's going to largely avoid us, which is what happens in the Patterson Gimlin film when the Bigfoot just kind of walks off and doesn't confront the men. That said, I mean, I'm very respectful of nature. You know, you have to have a healthy respect for nature when you're out the outdoors. You had mentioned, you know, running into a bear. Sometimes when I'm out looking for cryptids, I'm thinking about, you know, in Texas, one of the scariest animals you don't want to run across is a wild pig. You got giant 250, 300-pound hogs down here, and they are very aggressive and they will charge you. When I was in Alaska, we were concerned about the bears, but what were we more concerned about? The mooses.
Oh,
Mooses are like 1,500 pounds and they are very
Yeah.
aggressive and they will charge you and turn your car over. So there's always an animal out there that you're kind of, you know, in the back of your head, you're thinking, okay, that's, you know, let's look out for that. The scariest encounter I've ever had, which was actually kind of nerve-wracking, was in 2005. I was with two other investigators at a place in North Texas called Cottonwood Lake, where there had been recent Bigfoot sightings. We were on an expedition. We were alone out there in the middle of nowhere. Just after dark, we heard something grunting at us from the brush. And I've got a recording of it, and it sounded just like an ape. I mean, it was a huge, powerful, just like that. And we all looked at each other and we're like dropping F-bombs, like, what is that? You know, we're outdoorsmen. We've never heard anything like that before. And so that's when I was kind of the most nervous. Reason being, sometimes I carry a shotgun when I'm out in Texas or whatever, mainly for like the hogs and gators and snakes or whatever. But I wasn't armed on this trip. And one of us had a gun. The rest of us were unarmed. To his credit, he was going to try to flush it out. And I got on one end of this brushy, you know, with my camera, and the other guy was on the other end. And I was just thinking, I'm about to be more famous than Patterson, but this will be the last thing I ever do. It'll be the Gerhard film, and you know, rest in peace.
And then it's just two dudes like covered in peanut butter that are running at you, and you're like, what the?
Yeah. But anyways, this guy started going on his belly crawling with the shotgun through the brush, and it was pretty thick. And he backed out. And he said, "Man, this is nuts because I'm exposed. I'm going to be on my belly going in, and I don't know what this thing is. It sounds aggressive." So we tried to, you know, it's a long story, and I write about it in the Bigfoot book. But we got to a higher vantage point with a spotlight. We did see some eyes shine, yellowish green, that looked like it was in the same spot. We heard some other vocalizations that night. We camped out there and heard these moaning sounds, and it was actually answering back to me because I would call out, and then a little while later it would call back, and it seemed to be interacting with us. And then the next morning, when we finally made our way through this brush in the daylight, we found deep human-like footprints and some mutilated turtle shells that had been torn in half and thrown around. So all of that to me was the most convincing thing I've experienced personally, and probably the most harrowing. And I will say that there are 3 other occasions where I felt like I might be close to a Sasquatch vocalizing. And on all of those occasions, like Patterson, I ran and moved quickly toward that sound, convincing myself that this is my job. It's like, I'm out here to look for this thing. Well, how am I going to look if I suddenly think it's there and I don't do anything about it? So you just kind of throw caution to the wind at that point, and also faith in, you know, that an animal isn't necessarily going to kill you just because you're there. So, you know,
I think what I love most about this is that here's someone like you who's dedicated their whole lives to this. And I would want someone like you to find this, because I can just imagine how happy you would be, and how like how mind-blowing, for one thing. But one of the questions that Josh and I always kind of laugh about is, and discuss late night, is how come there's never been like a body of, say, a Loch Ness floating, or a Bigfoot, or a chupacabra? Like some of the stuff we see, it's kind of like I could explain it based on it was a fetus of a certain animal or whatever. But so could you kind of touch upon that? I know you mentioned in your book, you talk about somebody's found stuff where it's like it actually turned out to be an ape carcass or a monkey carcass, but how come we haven't actually seen, did they bury their dead? Like how's their mindset for this?
No, those are strong arguments against, and you know, things that have to be considered. Okay, so obviously each type of cryptid has to be taken on a case by case basis.
Correct.
Some are more probable than others. Chupacabra is not so probable in my opinion, kind of far out there. Same with
Right.
Mothman. Things like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster could be. There's a lot of evidence. Now, to answer your question, you know, why haven't we found a body? Yeah, it's a solid question, because it seems like if there's a viable breeding population, there have to be enough of them. They're big. Eventually someone's going to find a carcass somewhere. But my answer to you is, as unbelievable as it sounds, is there have been bodies found, and they just haven't been properly recognized. And you know, for example,
interesting, right,
with regard to the Loch Ness Monster, maybe not at Loch Ness, but as I write about in the book, I think that the Loch Ness Monster is just one example of the same species spread across the globe. And these are basically undiscovered primitive whales called archaeocetes. And in 1937, at a whaling station off the coast of British Columbia, some flensers cut open a sperm whale's stomach, and a juvenile one of these animals slid out. And it was wholly intact. It was a snake-like animal with a horse-like head and flippers. Wow. And they put it up on boxes and took pictures of it. And it was at Naden Harbor. It's called the Naden Harbor carcass. But subsequently, though those photos still exist, the carcass itself, you know, they disposed of, or nobody knows what happened and what they did with it. So that's a shame. But so that's an example of a missed opportunity. And we have tragically a lot of those in the field of cryptozoology. With regard to Bigfoot, I think that, you know, it's a complex problem. We're probably talking about an exceptionally rare species, perhaps teetering on the edge of extinction. We're talking about an animal that's presumably highly intelligent, maybe not to our level of Homo sapiens, but smart enough to recognize that we are its greatest threat and direct competition. So it avoids us. And therefore it lives in the most remote wilderness areas we don't go. It moves around a lot, highly nomadic, and it's also seems to be nocturnal. So if you think about a highly intelligent, very rare animal that's living in remote wilderness, moving around a lot at night, that's not something we would likely find. Now, still, there would be, the odds would be there that maybe if they don't bury their dead, and that's a theory, that would tie into what I just explained, right? If they're smart enough to avoid us, they're smart enough to hide their remains from us. But still, you think that maybe by chance someone would go in a cave or find, and there are those stories too, you know? So there are a few accounts of, okay, someone found a body, but no one knows what happened to it. There's something called the Minnesota Iceman that may or may not have been a dead Bigfoot that turned up in the 60s and disappeared again. So you have all these different factors. And the last one, important one, I think, is that, you know, just the fact that remains even remains from large animals, they aren't always very obvious, and they don't always last a long time. So even something like a moose, which I talked about a minute ago, you know, a dead moose in the wilderness, it's not long before bacteria, insects, birds, coyotes, everything, even mice and deer will eat the bones, and everything just kind of gets scattered and disintegrated. And even if that had happened with a Bigfoot and there were some bones left, can you imagine someone just like walking through the woods and they see a big bone and they think, whoa, that must be a moose or a bear or something. Look at that big femur. And they just step right over it, not knowing that that might have been, you know, the evidence. So I don't know. There's a lot of different factors there, and I know I'm rambling, but one last point I want to make, which is all of the major cryptids that we always talk about are all predators, right? They're all presumably carnivorous. Bigfoot's an apex predator, an omnivore, in my opinion. The Loch Ness Monster, probably a predator. Mystery big cats, cryptid wolves, and things like that. You don't hear about cryptid deer or sheep, you know, it's because those animals would be, frankly, pretty easy to discover for the most part, you know. Well,
we're going to make one here today on the pod. We're going to make a cryptid sheep to start.
So anyways, the whole point there is that obviously predatory animals are more intelligent. They're more elusive. That's how they're built and designed, is to avoid being seen. I mean, you could probably be within 50 yards of a mountain lion and not know it if it doesn't want you to know it. You know?
Well, you bring up a good point, because I think half the population, probably more so, they're on their phones, not doing. So if someone goes to hike, they're not out there hiking looking for Bigfoot. They're going to get their workout in, take some pictures of the summit, Snapchat, whatever. The people that like us, or obviously yourself, that are specifically looking for this stuff, if you came across a bone or a footprint or some weird marks on a tree, you're going to study that, examine it. And I think the problem is, and it's a good problem to, if they are around and live, that they can preserve them and not be bothered by humans, is that if we do see that stuff, we can kind of be like, if I see a bone or something that, hey man, I've seen enough dead deer in my life, I gotta call Ken or send the pictures. And I think they've lost that sense of wonderment and study and science. It's all getting lost in, like you said, social media and other bullshit. And I think there needs to be this sense of wonder, like space. Hey, like this would be really cool if we found this stuff.
Yeah, agreed. I wish more people would become citizen cryptozoologists and look for those kinds of things. I love it when people send me pictures of animal carcasses they've stumbled upon, or hair samples, or any of that stuff. And 99.9% of the time it's always, eventually it's a mystery, but you can solve it and say, oh, this is, this, I think this is what this is. But someday hopefully that won't be the case.
Right. You mentioned Mothman a bunch of times, and I'm glad, because I tend to think that after watching the movie again, Hollywood, I'm like, part of me is like, I do the research of the town and the bridge sightings. And I'm like, maybe this is just a folk tale that grew and passed down the generations, of the story that passed through. How the footage of that just seems really like the stuff you see with Bigfoot, Loch Ness, like it's more believable than Mothman. Do you think this because this thing isn't a real entity? Because I love the story of it. That's what draws me in. It's like, even if it was fake, I still want to go to this town. I want to look at this bridge and find something that I know doesn't exist, because it draws me in the story and the history of it.
Yeah, no, fair question. So the field of cryptozoology has kind of evolved through the years. It began in the 1950s, and it was started by traditional zoologists who were looking for undiscovered animals. And through the years, particularly in the weird 1970s, cryptozoology began to get lumped in more and more with stuff like psychic phenomenon and the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs,
like paranormal
and
stuff, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of a lot of, to me, it's a sociological phenomenon that people it's the way our minds work. It's like, oh, I've got all these things that I can't explain. I'll just kind of put them together and they're just one folder or whatever, But that said, there are some cryptids that are kind of on the fringe, and I consider like the Mothman, Dogman, Goatman. They're all these half human, half animal hybrids, which, first of all, that's a non-starter, because if you understand anything about the fossil record and evolution, then you know that there can't be a Mothman, right? There's
Correct.
no such, it's impossible for a winged humanoid to exist.
Right.
And moreover, if you read the descriptions of the encounters, it doesn't sound like a natural animal, because unlike, things like Bigfoot that will move away from you, these creatures chase people and scratch their cars and jump on the hoods of their cars. And that's just not a natural behavior pattern for any animal. So from that perspective, right off the bat, it doesn't seem like it fits into the paradigm of the natural world. And then there are these other layers of weirdness with Mothman. You have all the UFO sightings and activity that was going on around Point Pleasant at that time. Yep. You had the Men in Black visits, popping into the newspaper office and knocking on people's doors, telling them not to talk about it. You have some of the eyewitnesses claim that they developed psychic abilities or poltergeist activity in their house. And so with all those layers of weirdness, it's easy for me to, come to the conclusion that the Mothman, if it exists, and by the way, it's not just in Point Pleasant. I've investigated Mothman cases in Mexico and Texas.
Oh wow! So I didn't know that. I thought it was just contained.
It's worldwide. In fact, you can go back, 2,000 years ago to the ancient Assyrians. They had depictions of these beings known as the Apkallu, which were basically like winged humanoids, and they're, so I mean, they're all over the world. There are these winged humanoids depicted like Mothman in different cultures. So there's a long history. But anyways, I know I'm going a long way around the barn.
No,
but
I love, because so when you see a painting like that or a cave art, they either had to have seen something like we're talking about now, or is passed down to generations like we're hearing about in these stories. So there has to be something to it. Like that, like I don't seeing a winged humanoid, like that's not an everyday occurrence. So for 2,000 years ago, for them to make an observation on it, there's got to be something to that.
Mm.
You would think, and the fact that they're so widespread,
Right.
it's not just in one place. But anyways, I view the Mothman as a metaphysical phenomenon. And I'm not, that's not in my wheelhouse. So I don't portray myself as a quote unquote paranormal ghost hunter. That's not what I
Right.
do. But considering all the levels of high strangeness associated with the Mothman and flying humanoid cases, if it's a real true phenomenon, and I've interviewed a lot of very credible eyewitnesses and experiencers, then, it's not an animal, it's not flesh and blood. So then what?
Right.
I'm not too proud to say that it's something beyond my comprehension. I don't understand what mechanism it is. Some people like to try to explain it as quote unquote interdimensional, extraterrestrials from another plane of existence, dimension, and some people even say demonic if they're spiritual, and that's kind of how they see the world. So they're not from around here. That's my conclusion.
You mentioned kind of the fossil record, and it's what I kind of like about you is you kind of take that more scientific approach to a lot of this stuff, because there's definitely people who have gone way more into the paranormal side of things. And kind of to pivot off that, so one of the conversations I've had with some of my Bigfoot hunting friends is, they're very much interested in these more aggressive, violent encounters that they've read about or heard about through other podcasts or shows. Some of it allegedly leading to loss of life. And the theory we came up with was maybe that what people are referring to as a dog man out in the woods, maybe it's not actually canine related. It's just what they can see is how they're illustrating it with their words. But maybe it's another strain of a Bigfoot. Maybe at some point evolution kicked off two different sets of species, and there's one that's leaning more, omnivore out there, and there's another that's more predatory. Do you have lend any credibility to that, or do you think these are just fun stories?
No, it's a good point. So check it out. A lot of cryptids are considered to be cases of what I call composite identity. So there's not just one explanation, it's a bunch of different things that are kind of being lumped together, right? And including in that, you might have an actual mystery animal at the root of it, but then you have misidentifications of known species. You have hoaxes and people making up stories and having delusions. You might have, like you said, I mean, the dog man, generally speaking, the descriptions of Sasquatches are pretty standard with the flat face and, no visible ears or anything like that. But there are some cases like out here in West Texas, we have a Bigfoot called the Horizon City Monster sighted outside of El Paso in the 2000s. And Bridget, everyone that saw it just said that it had a dog-like head, that it was a Bigfoot, but it had pointy ears and kind of more of a pronounced muzzle-like face.
Right. Yeah.
Mathism. So you could have that. I think where people are, like you say, you see something big and dark and hairy in the woods. Some people may not immediately think Bigfoot. They may think werewolf or dogman just because that's what their bias is. That's kind of where they lead them.
Right.
So yeah, I think that could be a possibility. Now, I've interviewed some dogman witnesses who swear that it said, no, this thing, and I asked them that, could it have been a Bigfoot? And they said, no, this thing had a dog-like, it was a wolf's head, So I've interviewed a few of those folks that have seen those. And so, that's their impression. So that's hard to refute.
Yeah.
But I would lump the dog man that we hear about nowadays on all these podcasts and stuff, I think goes more into kind of that Mothman fringe, really weird area. But there certainly might be some crossover where you're getting some Bigfoot sightings kind of mixed up. Now, and I'm sorry, I know I'm a rambler, but there's so much
I love
stuff
good.
I love to talk about. The dogman researchers that I talk to, for whatever reason, have a bias where they want to always connect dogman to Bigfoot. So for example, in the LBL area in Kentucky, where you supposedly have this marauding killer dogman, but there have also been Bigfoot sightings, there's a territorial battle going on, and Bigfoot's only on the north end and dogman's only on the south end. And I've heard that from other dogman reasons. Well, I investigate Bigfoot and dogman, but all the dogman sightings are over here in Bigfoot, and maybe they're competing for territory. So for whatever reason, the dogman researchers have to keep bringing Bigfoot into the conversation, even if they're not willing to admit that the dogman is a Bigfoot or could be a Bigfoot. But for some reason, I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. That it's an interesting observation that they feel like for whatever reason, there has to be some connection,
When you've done a show like Missing Alaska, and I've always loved Monster Quest or like Ancient Aliens, do you find that you're brought on there a part of those episodes or whatever to kind of give credence to these entities like Bigfoot or whatever, or is it just Hollywood and television trying to create this tension and drama with something just to get people to watch it? Like, where do you draw the fine line where, hey, there's a TV show, we need an expert, we're bringing Ken in for 2 episodes, and do they need to bring someone on like you to actually get people who laugh at the idea of Bigfoot existing just to draw the people that do love Bigfoot to watch these shows?
I mean, that's a fair question. I don't know if I've ever kind of put myself in their shoes of the producers and the people that put these shows in terms of that. But I like to think that I bring an air of credibility to the field.
Right.
I'm one of the more skeptical and scientifically minded investigators in this field. And that's been my focus. And I will say that, when I'm doing TV shows, typically there's an audition process first. Even when you've been on 50 TV shows, they still want to do like a Skype interview and audition you. And what the feeling that I get looking at the faces of the TV producers is like, maybe they were skeptical, but they're listening to me and they're kind of like, it's like, I'm making the argument. It's like, well, wow, maybe there is something to this.
Well, every time I see you on these shows, I get a sense of, okay, I actually got to pay attention because this could be if he's here, like, this could be something real. But I also get the sense that some of these other shows, and I've met a bunch of the guys on Killing Bigfoot, and nothing against them is humans or people. But then there's other people that we're not going to name names because I don't know who knows who or whatever. But I get a sense there's a lot of ego in what you do because not a lot of people do what you do. And there's always this rush where if it's not Ken finding it, so-and-so here is going to push Ken off a cliff just to get the first shot of Bigfoot. So how do you kind of deal with the ego specifically in your field? I mean, it's got to be kind of
like the clout chasing,
right? Like when you do your conventions, I do want to talk about this thing you got coming up end of the month. But when you do these type of things, are people looking at you like this like I can't trust this guy, or this guy, he's not sharing his scientific research with me? Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that is a great question. But I just want to wrap up one point on the TV thing, which is every TV company is different. Every network's different. So it's a case by case basis. I always emphasize going in to the producers that I will not hoax anything. I won't fake anything.
Right.
It's all about my integrity and my reputation. As weird as I seem, my integrity and reputation are really important to me. That said, I have bumped heads with producers on a number of occasions where it's like they told me one thing and then I went in and they're like, well, will you say this or do this? And I know,
Right.
But I also acknowledge, and I talk to them about this, is look, television is entertainment first and foremost.
Correct.
There are people paying millions of dollars to produce those shows. That's their money. So no one's going to watch a show where nothing happens. And so, there are times when you might, I won't say fake things, but like Monster Quest, there was an episode where we saw some eye shine and we, eye shine.
Right.
And it was a rabbit. After the commercial, you'll find out, it's a rabbit. We didn't know it was a rabbit right away, but maybe we played up the enthusiasm of seeing eye shine just because we want to get the audience excited. Oh, there is something over there. There's eye shine, So anyways, that was a tangent. Okay. Big egos. Yes. Big egos. Think about it. What kind of person does it take to chase a legend? So it's basically what you're dealing with is a bunch of legend chasers, and the big egos are not new. They go back to the original Bigfoot, the 4 horsemen, as we call them, John Green, Renee DeHinden, Grover Krantz, Peter Byrne, Bob Titmus would be the 5th horseman. A lot of people forget him. Those guys were constantly butting heads from the very beginning. They were all passionate. They had strong opinions and ideas about how to get the job done, how to find the evidence. And some of them started out as friends and ended up hating each other till their deathbed, sadly. So, but it's just because they all had big egos, and it's nothing has changed. I mean,
Right.
I admit I have kind of a big ego at times. I feel like I've put the work and the time in, and I have strong opinions. I try to work with others. I respect a lot of people, a heck of a lot of people in the field that I look up to and respect and trust their opinions. But yes, their heads do butt, because it's just there is a lot of ego involved. And I try to point that out when I hear this from the younger researchers. I don't think I want to be in this field. There's too much drama and there's too much. I can't be. I was like, dude, it's always been like this, though. So I mean,
right.
Renee DeHanden once put a shotgun in John Green's face and said, "I will kill you." So that actually happened. So, I mean, I haven't seen anything that extreme happen, at least recently. So,
yeah.
It does happen, but you just try to get along. You respect other people's research if they're putting in good work. And the thing that gets me is when you get the ego and the lack of substance. So you have these people out there that are self-anointed experts that have, trademark theories about everything, and they're packaging it and branding it and selling it in books or movies or whatever. But it's like, I mean, have you even really done field research? Have you really,
right.
So I don't know, but there's a little of my ego coming out right there.
I like that. Now, end of the month, you have some speaking stuff and these type of things. So when you do these conventions and everything, what is your aim to go in there? Is it to help other people understand that, like you said, your books, you are very pro science. You will refute stuff. You will study stuff. Is that your goal, to help other people understand that to do this, or are you there to get brought in to kind of sway people that want to think one way or the other?
Well, I'm there to spread the gospel first and foremost, which is just enlighten people and provide the most accurate, objective information that I've accumulated. And that's the same with my books. There's so much noise out there on the internet these days, and fake YouTube videos and people putting up podcasts. I mean, you don't know what someone that's coming into it really doesn't know what to believe. And oftentimes they'll let their bias take over and believe what they want to believe, which is the coolest aspects or whatever. So what I always try to provide is the most accurate information. Someone's, and not to be Mr. Know-it-all, but someone, oh yeah, the Patterson film of 72 is like, no, it was October 20th, 1967. It's just like in any study, you have to get the facts straight.
Right.
These are the dates, these are the names.
Yeah.
The benefit, so that's what I try to provide, is that clarity. I enjoy networking with not only meeting my fans and friends, but networking with other researchers and finding out what other people are up to and hearing their theories and stuff. That's always a lot of fun. You can do those at these events. And to be honest with you, cryptozoology is a very difficult field to earn a living. So, I mean, just getting out there and being able to sell a few books, and sometimes I get a small speaker's fee or whatever, that really kind of helps cover the cost of my research and, all the expenses and things that I incur. So it's kind of a mixture of things, but, I will say that for example, I'm going to be speaking at the Nebraska Bigfoot conference in a couple of weekends. There's going to be a definite melting pot there of Bigfoot ideologies. So I'm going to be at that event. I think I'm going to be more of the flesh and bone science-based guy. And then they're bringing over Igor Bortsev from Russia, who's been investigating the Yeti and Bigfoot since the 1970s.
Yeah.
But Igor is now into this. They cloak, they travel in between dimensions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Smart guy. I've met him before. He's put in a lot of time and work, but I don't agree with that. But he'll represent his side, and I'll hopefully make an argument for the other side. So.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that. What if Josh and I, whoever, wanted to be like, we want to learn how to pack a ruck to go on a hunt, but could you take people out in the woods or wherever to kind of do classes? Or like, how do you, if Josh and I really want to take cryptozoology to the next level, what do we do, or what do you tell someone to do to get ready to go down a path which you've done your whole life?
Yeah, advice for like, I mean, both, someone who wants to get into it, like this is a field I really want to get into, as well as maybe someone who is a hobbyist that's like, I treat it seriously, but I can't commit full time. Like, what advice would you have?
Well, that's a good question. Years ago, I actually tried to start a thing called crypto excursions, where I would take people out in the field on
That's
different
awesome.
expeditions. It didn't really take off. I was involved with
Mm,
some other researchers, and we couldn't quite get it off the ground. So, kind of threw in the towel on that. But I would say if you're a younger person, and I get emails from kids that are in high school or in college and are looking to get into cryptozoology, I always tell them to get a degree in zoology or anthropology or some accredited degree at a university, something I regret never having done,
mhm.
because that will give you a lot more credibility coming in, because a lot of the scientific naysayers, who are you? But if you say, oh, I'm such and such, I have a master's in
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
vertebrate paleontology, then suddenly it's kind of like, okay, you're on their level a little bit more. It brings a lot of credibility to the field. um, and for those people, and also for laymen looking to get into the field, I would say join a group. There are active Bigfoot organizations and cryptid hunting, anomalous phenomenon hunting groups all over the country. And you have to be a little careful with those, because some of them are a little wackier, and then some of them are a
Hmm.
little bit more grounded and, scientific. But that's the best way to kind of learn the ropes, is to just join up with a group and begin working with other researchers and the organized expeditions and field trips. And a lot of times you'll meet eyewitnesses and get to conduct interviews, and you'll just accumulate experience.
Mm.
And that's kind of how I did it too. I was already kind of grew up in the outdoors, but 20 odd some years ago, when I wanted to get really heavy into Bigfoot research, I joined up with a bunch of guys here in Texas that were like, hardcore outdoorsmen, trackers, wilderness survival guys. And I thought,
Right.
okay, these are the guys that I want to be with, because they can track and they can hunt and read sign. And so that kind of, eventually I broke off, but at least it kind of got me, acclimated to
Mm.
a methodology. So
I think you should start this. It was funny because whatever it is about Bigfoot, I do security for a lot of bands. The band Shinedown, two of the members are very pro Bigfoot. Like they'll go tonight, and so I think it'd be kind of cool if we put something together where we can actually go out there. And I
Oh,
don't
for
want to
sure.
crawl
Yeah.
around with a shotgun in the woods and get chased down by a dog man. Um, but one of the cool things with Josh is he's an avid gamer, Twitch and all this stuff. But he played this game the other day. I was watching a live stream, this
Mm.
Bigfoot game. And so, Josh, if you could kind of describe that game, and then Ken, when it comes to pop culture, movies, television, and I'm talking stuff that isn't like a TV show based in reality, there's certain stuff that you think they overdo or underdo when it comes to, like, outside Harry and the Hendersons, which is a nice Sasquatch Bigfoot. Then you have on one side of the spectrum this violent killing animal. Like there's no in between area where it's like it just seems everything's very one way or the other to sell people on the idea of this Bigfoot creature.
Yeah, to take what you were asking, some of those games are, I think they're kind of being inspired by, a lot of the shows that like, even Ken's been on, and a lot of, this kind of the travel channel, if you've watched recently, has turned very much into like the paranormal,
Yes. Yeah.
and some of the stuff on there is great. It's great entertainment. I love watching, was it Terror in the Woods, some of that
Yep.
stuff. So I think a lot of these games are just kind of capitalizing on, the interest. So the game I was playing the other day is just called Bigfoot, and they essentially dump you off in the woods with I think at least one other player you can go in as, maybe more, and they kit you up with drones and night vision and cameras and rifles and all this stuff and flares, and you're just out there. It's a horror themed game, but you're out there hunting Bigfoot. You don't know when he's going to come, and I mean, it scares the pants off you when he shows up. And but there's other games that are coming out. There's a couple paranormal, like ghost hunting games from all the ghost hunting shows, and it's definitely a small sector of like the gaming audience right now. But the fact that it's even there, I think, is indicative of kind of like where the culture is kind of going, and like kind of what kids are more interested in playing these days as well. So hopefully it redirects some of that attention to the more scientific end of things, and people
Right.
realize this is just for fun, and hopefully it doesn't keep them out of the woods for sure.
well, definitely that sounds fun. That makes me happy that that you've got people taking an active interest in these things, even if it's just on that level first, and then maybe they'll take it a little bit further. With regard to your question, John, I mean, there's a lot of sociological biases that are involved in how we perceive. Now, Bigfoot has become a huge brand, right? You slap Bigfoot on anything these days and it sells. So it's but
beef
I
jerky,
think,
right?
but I think for the most part, the archetype of the hairy ape man, it seems to fit better in terms of, well, I mean, there's a duality there. You're right, because on the one hand, we want to make it our monster because it's big, it's hairy, powerful, scary, looks like us, but it's not quite us, smells bad, throws claws or throws rocks and things, has claws. So I think Bigfoot plays a little bit better in terms of being a monster. And I think that's borne out by the fact that a lot of my generation of Bigfoot researchers were heavily influenced by The Legend of Boggy Creek, which was an early 70s Bigfoot film, which is really scary and well done at a low budget. And most of the Bigfoot, because I'm in the Bigfoot groups and circles, it's always about, exists and Willow Creek and, some of these kind of like different creature from Black Lake.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but you have for the young ones and the kids, you got Harry and the Hendersons, and then you've got these kind of like Littlefoot and Yeti kind of animated movies. So it kind of works both ways, I guess. But there's an interesting theory about Bigfoot and our other man beasts. Even if it doesn't exist as a real flesh and blood animal, is it a cultural memory that's been passed down for thousands of generations from our ancestors who were, essentially competing with and coming in contact with real life Bigfoot, Sasquatches, hundreds of thousands of years ago, our pre-human ancestors. And so, for whatever reason, that archetype of the hairy wild man has been passed down from generation to generation. And it's something that we need. There's a real, need for this archetype in our reality for whatever reason. It's a reflection of where we came from, or something that we once feared. So who knows? There's a lot of interesting aspects to the phenomenon.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that as more games and movies and TV shows get out there, that, like you guys both said, that it leads credence to the people out there like yourself, Ken, that are actually doing the science and the research to kind of help your field grow, with people giving money and donating and actually trying to. For me, like, I'm all about the space race, but where's the Bigfoot race? I want that guy out here. So before I let you go, Josh, where can we find you on social media? And you can as well. Let us everyone know where we can find you guys.
Yeah, if everyone's interested in checking out the content I'm just starting to make, there's not too much out there yet, but feel free to follow me at LongDogsOfWar on Twitter, and the same on Instagram, but with a 1 at the end, and as well as on Twitch. And we'll start putting more of these types of games out there, as well as anything that people are interested in seeing.
Love it.
Very cool. Well, guys, thanks again for having me on. Had a real good time, some great questions, and thanks to everyone who kind of tuned in to check it out. So I'm available, I'm accessible on social media, of course. I was like, available is kind of a little bit too inviting.
My God, what is this? Like a
little too, I'm accessible.
He likes long walks in the woods.
Yeah. I've got a website, kengerhard.com. I'm also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel where I produce short cryptid videos. And of course, you can visit my Amazon author page if you're interested in any of my books.
Awesome books, easy read. And there's even the science stuff. I'm always scared away when I read, like, I'm not a tactical guy at any means, but when I read Tom Clancy novels, some of the stuff is above my head. I actually live that life. So, but reading your book, I'm like, man, this guy actually, like, outside, like a borderline scientist, like, this might scare me, but I recommend it to anyone, young, old, to read the books. They're awesome. They're great. No craziness. And this has been great, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all for checking out this week's episode. Once again, I'm John. If you liked what you heard and saw today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out our brand new merch store with hats, coffee mugs, t-shirts, other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, thank you all for support. Be safe, and see you next week.